when you're deciding what computer you need to buy for ProPresenter, this is the very first place that you should look. renewedvision.com/propresenter.php page equals requirements. I'll leave a link in the notes section for that, but this is where you want to go. Now, the reason is, even before you decide whether it's Mac or Windows, look at the system requirements. If you have in mind a machine that does not meet these system requirements, the bare minimum, then don't even think about it. And I would advise you not to look at the minimum, but to look at something with the future in mind. So today, I'm recording this in January of 2017. It recommends a minimum of a 2.4 gigahertz Intel Core 2 Duo processor or better for a Mac. I would not buy one like that. If I had one already, I might use it until I could afford something better. In fact, that's what I'm recording on, is a 2.4 gigahertz Intel Core 2 Duo MacBook Pro, a mid-2010. So it works, but I wouldn't want to buy it right now. If you buy something that is on its way out, then you won't be able to do any upgrades or continue on past where things are. So that's why I want to have you look at this. Occasionally I'll have people that ask me, Paul, someone just donated a 2 gigahertz Intel Core 2 Duo Mac to our church. Can we use it? Maybe, but really this is the minimum. So I guess that's what I want to say is, if you're fudging any of the minimums, you really want to look at it. If you already have it, feel free to try, but I wouldn't want to depend on that as my main thing on a weekend service. It's just not what you want to look at. The next question you need to ask yourself is, do I want Mac or Windows? A couple of things that you need to keep in mind is that the Mac version has been going since ProPresenter 1. The Windows version they released with ProPresenter 5 and a new version with ProPresenter 6. Renewed Vision seems very committed to keeping up the Windows version, but keep in mind that this is going to be a little more sticky because people might have several of these, but because there's so much variation in the PC market, if you have Windows 7 and everything else, it may or may not work. If you have an i5 or equivalent AMD processor, and that's good, but you've only got 4 gigs of RAM, it may or may not work. If you have a graphics card that supports OpenGL 3.2 and higher, but it's not one of the ones listed, it may or may not work. So, in general, what I want to recommend to you is that you go with something that's at least what you see here, and don't stray too far from the recommendations that Renewed Vision makes, especially on the PC side, because the variations that might work perfectly good for other software. Renewed Vision is a small company. They're not Microsoft. They're not making this to work on every single possible computer made today. They're making it to run on a subset. So make sure that you have that, especially if you're on Windows. Another question to consider is, what will I be doing with ProPresenter? This is something that a lot of churches forget to check, is they get big ideas that they're going to use all these modules, or several of them, and while most of them, or a good number of them, are supported on both platforms, you'll notice the multi-screen module is, the SDI NDI module is, the alpha keyer module is. So you might start to get a false sense of security. Master control module, oh, that's supported, that's cool. Edge blending, yay. Communication module is not. So if you're trying to control lights, it just won't work. If you're trying to get a switcher to control ProPresenter, it just may not work. So that's something to consider. The MIDI module is a subset of the communications module, so it may not work. So those are really the two big ones, and I went back and forth with a church that was saying, you know, Renewed Vision says it's not supported, but we're all PC, so we're going to make it work. No, you're not. They don't have access. They're not going to give you access to your code base. You're not going to reprogram it. Even if you did, that's going to be a bit of a problem. And that reminds me of something else, is you'll notice that there are two major platforms listed here. Linux is not listed. OS X has Linux in the background. Actually, FreeBSD, which is more a flavor of Unix, but that is neither here nor there. I'm just saying that Linux is not supported, so if you want to run ProPresenter on Linux, that's going to be problematic. I'm not saying there aren't people trying to do it. There are, but I just wouldn't recommend it. So here are the things that you need to consider. First, is the machine I'm looking for supported? If it isn't, then maybe you need to look at a different machine. Do I want to use the communications module or the MIDI module? If so, Mac is your choice with ProPresenter 6. Maybe ProPresenter 7, it will support that module as well, but it doesn't today with ProPresenter 6, so keep that in mind. So you really have a couple of things to consider. One other thing that I would advise you to consider is the experience of all the churches that I've talked to that run ProPresenter. And you might guess, because I'm Mr. ProPresenter, that I talk to a lot of churches about it, and I do. I've heard one church that swears ProPresenter works better on their PC. Every other one, if they have used it on both, they say to the church, with the exception of this one, and I don't know if he had a bad configuration on his Mac, or it's just the perfect configuration on the Windows box, I don't know. But with the exception of this one, every other single church says, oh, it's so much better. It runs fine on Windows. There's nothing wrong with it. As long as you stick to the hardware that's required and the software, it runs fine on Windows. But it was created on the Mac, and a lot of churches that have done both, nearly every one, with the exception of this one that I'm telling you about, nearly everyone says the Mac is the way to go. So those are your choices. And now in a new lesson, we'll talk about choosing the right Mac and choosing the right PC.